My name is Lorraine Carter Hayes. I am 66 years old, and until that Tuesday afternoon in late spring, I believed I had already survived the worst life could offer. 8 years earlier, I buried my husband. Thomas collapsed at our kitchen table on an ordinary Thursday morning. One moment he was complaining about the cubs, the next he was gone. I survived the silence that followed. I survived the empty side of the bed. I survived learning how to drink coffee alone. I thought I understood loss. I didn't. That day began with routine. At 3 o'clock sharp, I poured hot water over a tea bag and stood by the dining room window, watching clouds gather over Plainfield, Illinois. The air felt heavy, metallic almost. The local radio station mentioned unstable weather pushing northeast. We don't panic in Illinois. We prepare. At 3:17 p.m., the sirens began. That sound doesn't warn you. It commands you. The wail cut through the neighborhood, sharp and relentless. My chest tightened as the announcer's voice broke through static. Tornado confirmed on the ground. Will County residents take shelter immediately? There is something surreal about packing your life into a suitcase while your house is still standing. I grabbed what my hands reached first: our wedding album, Thomas's old leather watch, my mother's quilt, insurance documents. 40 years reduced to what fit beneath my arm. In the basement, I pressed my back against the concrete wall, sweater clutched in my hands, as the house above me began to scream. Wood splintered, glass shattered. The sound wasn't wind, it was destruction with intent. The roar swallowed everything. The ground vibrated like a train tearing through the foundation. And then it stopped. Not gently. Abruptly. When I pushed open the basement door, daylight spilled in where my ceiling used to be. The roof was gone. The kitchen table where Thomas had laughed every Sunday morning, gone. The rose garden I attended for 20 years lay flattened in twisted soil. Neighbors staggered through debris, calling each other's names. Emergency vehicles wailed in the distance. Someone wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, but I barely felt it. I didn't cry when Thomas died. I cried then. Because grief is one thing, erasure is another. That night, relief volunteers directed people toward a high school gymnasium shelter. Cots lined the basketball court. Children cried. Generators hummed. I couldn't do it. I needed something solid, familiar. I needed my son. The next morning, I loaded my old sedan with 1 suitcase and 3 trash bags filled with what little survived. Mud and plaster clung to everything. My car smelled like ruin. As I drove north toward Chicago, I told myself this was temporary. Michael would understand. Michael lived in River North now, 35 stories of glass and steel overlooking the city. His building had a doorman and polished marble floors. When I stepped out of my dented sedan, I felt like I had crossed into someone else's life. The doorman handed me a visitor badge. Visitor. My son opened the apartment door before I knocked. For a split second, I saw the boy he used to be. Thomas's blue eyes, the same stubborn jaw. "Mom," he said. His voice was careful. The apartment gleamed. White furniture, stainless steel, art pieces chosen more for value than warmth. Tessa appeared behind him, immaculate, composed. She offered a tight smile. "Lorraine, we heard about the storm. That must have been awful." I sat gingerly on the edge of their sofa, afraid of leaving dirt behind. "It's temporary," I said quickly, "just until insurance clears. I can cook. I'll keep to myself." Michael didn't sit beside me. He lowered himself into a chair across from me, hands folded. "Mom, we've talked about this." "About what?" I asked. "Our space," he said. "We value our privacy." Privacy. I stared at him. "My house is gone, Michael." Tessa leaned forward, voice smooth. We think you'd be more comfortable somewhere designed for extended stays. There are wonderful furnished apartments nearby. And how do I pay for that? I asked quietly. Michael shifted. I can give you some money to help you get started. Started. Like I was launching a new phase of independence instead of fleeing debris. So that's it, I said, standing slowly. Your mother doesn't fit your sanctuary? No one answered. The silence was louder than the tornado. That night, I drove beneath the city streets and parked where no one looked too closely. I curled in the driver's seat, Thomas's sweater over my shoulders, and waited for morning. I told myself it was only for one night. I didn't yet understand that the storm had only begun. I thought losing my home was the worst thing that could happen. I didn't yet know the real devastation would come from realizing I had nowhere left to belong. I woke before sunrise, stiff and disoriented. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then the curve of the steering wheel against my shoulder reminded me. My neck ached. My legs were cramped beneath the dashboard. Outside, Chicago was already moving. Delivery trucks, early commuters, joggers pretending the world made sense. I sat upright slowly and checked my phone. No missed calls from Michael. That surprised me less than it should have. I drove to a gas station a few blocks away and washed my face in a public restroom sink. My reflection looked smaller than I remembered. Not older, just diminished. I smoothed my hair and told myself this was temporary. Insurance paperwork would clear. I would rebuild. But rebuilding requires somewhere to stand first. Around 9, I called the adjuster again. His tone was sympathetic but procedural. Given the scale of destruction, he said, claims are backlogged. It could be several weeks before we even complete assessment. Several weeks? I repeated. I'm afraid so. Weeks meant hotel bills, storage units, money. Money I did not have. I parked near the river and watched the water move under gray light. People walked by in tailored coats, coffee in hand, lives intact. I felt like a misplaced object. Around noon, I dialed Michael's number again. This time, he answered. Mom, I'm in a meeting. I just need to know, I said carefully, if staying with you for a few days is completely off the table. There was a pause. It's not about you, he said. It's about stability. Stability? I asked. I just lost my house. I know, he replied, voice tightening, and that's exactly why this is complicated. I understood then. He didn't want disruption in his controlled world. I'll figure something out, I said quietly. That's probably best, he replied. Probably best. I ended the call and sat very still. Grief, I understood. Rejection, especially from your own child, is something else entirely. By mid-afternoon, hunger forced me into a small diner off State Street. I ordered the cheapest item on the menu and lingered longer than necessary, not ready to return to my car. The waitress refilled my coffee twice without charging me. That small kindness nearly undid me. When I stepped outside, the wind had shifted colder. I could not sleep in the car again. I drove to a community center I found online, Senior Resource Assistance. The building was old but clean. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed softly over folding chairs and pamphlets. A woman named Diane sat behind a desk. She looked at me, really looked, and didn't rush. I lost my home in the tornado, I said, and I need somewhere to stay for a few days. She nodded gently. You're not the only one. Those words should have comforted me. Instead, they made everything more real. Diane arranged one night at a transitional shelter for displaced women. It's safe, she said. Temporary. Temporary. That word had become both anchor and threat. The shelter was orderly, rows of cots, low conversations, soft crying somewhere near the back. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to unfamiliar breathing. This was not how 66 was supposed to look. The next morning, Diane pulled me aside. There's someone asking about you, she said. My stomach tightened. Michael?
She shook her head. He didn't leave much detail, just a name. What name? She checked her notes. Daniel Harper. The world shifted slightly. Daniel. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in more than 40 years. My first love. The boy who left town for college and promised to write. The man who sent one letter after I married Thomas, kind, respectful, then disappeared into his own life. Did he say why he was looking for me? I asked. Diane smiled faintly. He said he heard what happened, and that if you were ready to talk, he'd be at a cafe on Maple this afternoon. Maple Street. I knew that cafe. It had survived 3 renovations and 2 ownership changes. My pulse quickened, not with romance, not yet, but with something more cautious. Recognition. I stood outside the cafe at exactly 3 p.m., watching through the glass. A man sat alone at a corner table, gray at the temples, shoulders broader than age should allow. Familiar posture. He looked up, and when his eyes met mine, 40 years collapsed into one steady breath. I thought the storm had taken everything from me. I didn't yet realize it might have returned something I never expected to see again.
For a moment, I didn't move. The cafe door felt heavier than it should have. Through the window, I could see him clearly now. Older, yes, but unmistakably Daniel. The way he leaned slightly forward when he sat. The way his hands rested loosely on the table as if he were prepared to listen. He looked up again. This time he smiled. Not widely, not dramatically, just enough to say he recognized me without needing confirmation. I stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly, and he stood as I approached. "Lorraine," he said, my name steady in his voice. "Daniel," I replied, surprised at how even I sounded. For a second, we just stood there, measuring time without acknowledging it. "You look," he started, then paused. "Different?" I offered. "Familiar," he corrected gently. That almost made me laugh. We sat. The cafe smelled like roasted beans and warm sugar. The normalcy of it grounded me. Daniel waited until I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup before speaking again. "I heard about the tornado," he said quietly. "I've been trying to reach you." "How did you even know?" I asked. "Small towns don't forget, and Chicago isn't as big as it pretends to be." I studied him. "Why now?" I asked, not accusing, just curious. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Because I heard you were alone." The words settled heavily between us. "I'm not alone," I said automatically. He held my gaze. "You're not?" That kind of honesty is disarming. I exhaled slowly. "My house is gone. Insurance is delayed. My son has his own life." Daniel nodded, absorbing more than I was saying. "Are you safe?" he asked. It wasn't a romantic question. It was practical. "For now," I replied. He leaned back slightly, choosing his next words carefully. "I moved back last year, after Ellen passed." I felt that shift in the air. "I didn't know," I said. "Most people don't," he replied. "Grief isn't loud." "No," I said softly. "It's persistent." We sat quietly for a moment. "I'm not here to reopen the past," Daniel continued. "I'm here because if I were in your position, I'd want someone to show up." Show up. That was all. No promises, no nostalgia, no sweeping declarations. Just presence. "Where are you staying?" he asked. "In my car," I admitted, before I could stop myself. His expression didn't change, which somehow meant more than shock would have. "That's not sustainable," he said calmly. "I'm aware," I replied. He reached into his coat pocket and slid a business card across the table. "My townhouse is 10 minutes from here," he said. "I have a spare room. You don't owe me anything. No expectations." I stared at the card. "You barely know me anymore," I said. "That's true," he replied. "But I know enough." "Enough for what?" "To know you wouldn't ask unless you had no other option." That hit harder than it should have. "You don't have to decide right now," he added, "but don't stay in that car tonight." I looked at him, really looked. Time had softened him, or perhaps sharpened him in the right places.
There was no desperation in his offer, no attempt to relive something that belonged to teenagers. This wasn't about romance. It was about dignity. "I'll think about it," I said. "That's fair," he replied. We talked longer than I expected, about nothing and everything, about how Chicago had changed, about his daughter living in Milwaukee, about the absurdity of aging and still feeling uncertain. When I finally stood to leave, Daniel said, "You deserve stability, Lorraine. Not charity, not compromise." I paused. "So did you," I said. Outside, the air had cooled. The sky threatened rain again. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. The idea of sleeping there another night felt smaller now, not braver, just unnecessary. At 7:42 p.m., I turned the wheel toward Daniel's address. Not because I was lonely, not because I was nostalgic, but because for the first time since the storm, someone had offered help without asking me to shrink in return. I told myself staying at Daniel's house was temporary, just shelter from the wreckage. I didn't yet understand that sometimes the safest place isn't where you hide from the storm. It's where someone chooses to stand beside you in it.
Daniel's townhouse was modest. Brick exterior, small patch of lawn, a porch light that hummed faintly when it switched on. Nothing extravagant, nothing performative. That mattered. When he opened the door, he didn't step too close. He didn't touch my suitcase. He simply said, "Come in." The entryway smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. The house was tidy but lived in, books stacked on a side table, a folded newspaper on the arm of a chair, a framed photograph of a woman I assumed was Ellen resting quietly on the mantel. He noticed my eyes linger. "That's her," he said softly. "She hated when I left things crooked." I nodded. Thomas was the same. There was no discomfort in mentioning them. That surprised me. Daniel showed me the spare bedroom, simple, clean, fresh sheets, a lamp already on. "You can lock the door if that makes you more comfortable," he said. "I trust you," I replied. "That's kind," he said, "but I'd rather you feel safe than polite." That line told me everything. That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time since the tornado. I didn't dream. The next morning, Daniel was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. "Coffee?" he asked. "Yes," I said, more grateful than I intended to sound. We sat across from each other at a small wooden table, morning light cutting softly across the floor. "This isn't permanent," I said. "I know," he replied calmly. "I don't want you to think." "I don't," he interrupted gently. "We're two adults who've survived long enough to know the difference between need and nostalgia." That steadied me. Around 10, my phone rang. Michael. I hesitated before answering. "Mom," he said, tone sharp. "Tessa saw you yesterday." "Where?" I asked. "At Maple Street Cafe, with a man." The accusation hung heavy. "Yes," I said evenly. "Daniel." There was silence. Then, "You're staying with him?" "How do you know that?" I asked. "Because you're not answering your apartment." I exhaled slowly. "I don't have an apartment, Michael." "You're moving in with some old boyfriend?" he said, voice rising. "I'm staying somewhere safe," I corrected. "This looks unstable," he snapped. "After everything that's happened, you should be making responsible decisions." "I am," I replied. "You don't know this man anymore. And you don't know the situation I'm in," I said quietly. Another pause. "You're reacting emotionally," he added. That one stung. "I survived a tornado," I said. "I asked my son for help. He offered money and distance." "That's not fair," he said sharply. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." The call ended abruptly. Daniel had heard enough to understand. "He's worried," he said. "He's embarrassed," I replied. Daniel didn't argue. That afternoon, I insisted on contributing. Groceries, cooking, cleaning. I would not become someone who simply occupied space. While chopping vegetables, I said,
I don't want this to become a rebellion against my son. It won't, Daniel replied, unless you let it. We ate dinner quietly that night. No romance, no tension, just two people navigating dignity. Later, as I stood washing dishes, Daniel spoke from the doorway. I don't want to complicate your life. You haven't, I said. You sure? I turned toward him. You offered shelter without condition, I replied. That's not complication. He studied me for a moment. I'm not here to rescue you, he said. I don't need rescuing, I answered. He smiled faintly. Good. That evening, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the subtle sounds of the house settling. I felt safe, not because of nostalgia, not because of romance, but because there were no expectations attached to my presence. Still, Michael's words lingered. Unstable, irresponsible, emotional. The labels people use when they can't control the narrative. I realized something uncomfortable then. This wasn't just about shelter. It was about autonomy, and Michael was not used to seeing me exercise it. I believed staying with Daniel would calm the chaos. I didn't yet understand that my son's fear wasn't about safety. It was about losing the authority he thought he still had over my life.
Michael didn't call the next day, or the day after that. Silence from him used to mean distance. Now it felt like calculation. I tried not to think about it. Instead, I focused on small, concrete things, calling the insurance company again, visiting the property to meet with an adjuster, sorting through what remained of my life in piles of keep, replace, and gone. Daniel drove me back to Plainfield that Saturday. The house, or what was left of it, looked smaller than I remembered. The foundation was still there, jagged wood beams exposed like broken ribs. The maple tree in the yard leaned at an angle, its roots partially exposed but still gripping soil. That tree's stubborn, Daniel said quietly. So was Thomas, I replied. We walked carefully through debris. The air smelled faintly of wet insulation and dust. I knelt near what had once been the living room and brushed dirt away from a warped picture frame. The glass was shattered. The photo inside was intact. It was from our 25th anniversary. Thomas mid-laugh, me mid-blink. I sat back slowly. I thought I'd feel more broken, I admitted. Daniel stood beside me. What do you feel? Resolved, I said after a moment. This part is over. The insurance adjuster met us an hour later, polite, procedural, efficient. He explained that the payout would cover structural loss, but not full replacement. Rebuilding would require loans, permits, months of construction. As he spoke, something settled in me. I didn't want to rebuild. Not the house, not the life that had existed within those walls. I had already survived losing Thomas. The tornado had taken the rest. That afternoon, I made a decision I hadn't yet spoken aloud. I'm selling the land, I told Daniel on the drive back. He glanced at me, but didn't react immediately. Are you sure? Yes. Because it's what you want? He asked. Because it's what makes sense, I replied, then paused. And because it's what I choose. When we returned to the townhouse, my phone was waiting with 3 missed calls. Michael. I called him back. You're selling? He demanded before I could speak. How do you know that? I asked. I spoke to the adjuster, he said. That stopped me. You what? I was checking on your claim, he replied. Someone has to. I didn't authorize that, I said. I'm your son, he answered, as if that explained everything. That doesn't give you access to my decisions. It gives me responsibility, he snapped. No, I corrected calmly. It gives you concern. There's a difference. Silence. You can't just liquidate assets impulsively, he continued. That property has value. I know, I said, and I intend to realize it. You're letting this man influence you, Michael said. Daniel looked up from across the room, but didn't interrupt. This has nothing to do with Daniel, I replied evenly. It has to do with the fact that I don't want to rebuild a life that no longer exists. You're acting out of emotion, Michael insisted. Yes, I said. Grief is emotional, so is clarity. He exhaled sharply. If you don't slow down, I may need to step in legally.
The room went very quiet. Legally? I repeated. For your protection, he said. There it was. The word people use when they're about to override you. You will not attempt to control my estate, I said carefully. Not now, not ever. You're not thinking clearly. I am thinking more clearly than I have in years. He ended the call abruptly. Daniel waited a moment before speaking. He won't stop easily, he said. I know. You want me to stay out of it? He asked. I considered that. No, I said finally. But I don't want you fighting my battles either. He nodded. Then we document everything. That night, I barely slept. Not because of fear, but because I finally understood the real tension. Michael didn't just disagree with my choices. He questioned my authority to make them. And that is something no storm can prepare you for. I thought selling the land would give me freedom. I didn't yet realize my son was preparing to prove, legally if necessary, that I no longer had the right to decide for myself. The envelope arrived 3 days later, certified mail. I recognized the return address before I opened it, a downtown Chicago law firm I had never contacted. My hands were steady when I slit the envelope open. Inside was a formal notice, Petition for Protective Oversight Evaluation. My son was requesting a court review of my financial and cognitive decision-making capacity. I read it twice, then a third time. Daniel stood across the kitchen watching my expression change. What is it? He asked quietly. I handed him the document. He read it slowly, jaw tightening as he reached the second page. He's trying to establish guardianship, he said. The word felt foreign. Guardianship was for dementia, for incapacitation, for loss of function. I was standing in a kitchen I cooked in yesterday. I was managing insurance claims. I was making informed decisions about property. And my son was asking the court to evaluate whether I was capable of thinking. For your protection, Michael had said. I sat down carefully. He thinks I'm unstable because I didn't follow his plan, I said. Daniel set the papers down gently. He thinks he's losing control, he replied. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This isn't about the land, I said. It's about authority. Daniel nodded, and once you challenge someone's authority, they often escalate. That afternoon, we met with an attorney Daniel trusted, a woman named Karen Whitmore, who specialized in elder autonomy law. Her office was small but orderly, shelves lined with binders and case files. She read the petition in silence. This is preemptive, she said finally. He's attempting to question your capacity before the land sale finalizes. Can he do that? I asked. He can file, she replied. Winning is another matter. What does that mean? It means we prepare documentation, Karen said calmly. Medical evaluations, financial records, independent testimony. I don't have dementia, I said quietly. Karen looked at me directly. I can see that. The evaluation was scheduled for the following week, a cognitive assessment. I hadn't felt that kind of insult since childhood. Michael called that evening. I'm doing this to protect you, he said before I could speak. From what? I asked. From making permanent mistakes, he replied. Selling my own property is not a mistake. It's impulsive. It's deliberate. You're being influenced. That's an accusation, I said evenly. It's an observation. I closed my eyes briefly. You're not protecting me, I said. You're protecting your version of me. Silence. You've changed, he said finally. Yes, I replied. I have. The line went dead. That night, Daniel sat across from me at the table. You don't have to fight this alone, he said. I know, I replied, but I need to win it myself. He nodded. Then we do it clean. The evaluation day arrived colder than expected. The office was sterile, quiet, a framed degree on the wall behind the doctor's desk. He asked questions. Dates, presidents, arithmetic. Memory recall. I answered calmly. At one point he asked, "Why are you selling your property?" "Because I do not want to rebuild a house tied to grief," I said, "and because I prefer liquidity to liability." He wrote something down. "And why are you staying with Mr. Harper?" "Because I chose to," I replied. No hesitation. When the assessment ended, he stood and extended his hand. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "your cognition is intact." The relief was sharp, not emotional, just validating. 3 days later, Karen called. "The petition has been withdrawn," she said. "Withdrawn?" I repeated. He likely realized he couldn't substantiate it. I hung up slowly. Daniel looked at me from the other side of the room. "Well," he asked. "He backed down," I said. Daniel didn't smile. Neither did I. Because this wasn't victory. It was revelation. My son had been willing to question my sanity to preserve his authority. And now that authority was gone. I thought defeating the petition would restore our relationship. I didn't yet understand that when control fails, resentment often grows. And my son was not finished.
Michael showed up unannounced. It was early evening. Daniel was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent. I knew before I opened it. Michael stood on the porch, coat collar raised, expression tight but controlled. He looked tired, not defeated, but shaken. "Can we talk?" he asked. I didn't invite him in immediately. "Is this a conversation?" I asked calmly, "or another strategy?" His jaw tightened slightly. "It's a conversation." I stepped aside. Daniel met us in the hallway. Michael glanced at him but didn't speak. "I'll give you privacy," Daniel said quietly, and retreated to the kitchen. Michael and I sat at the small dining table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You withdrew the petition," I said finally. "Yes." "Why?" "Because it wasn't going to work," he replied bluntly. That honesty startled me more than apology would have. "And if it had?" I asked. He didn't answer. I let the silence stretch. "You think I'm reckless," I said. "I think you're reacting," he corrected. "I survived a tornado," I replied. "I lost my home. And when I came to you, you measured inconvenience before compassion."
"That's not fair," he said sharply. "It's accurate." He looked down at his hands. "I've worked my entire life to build stability," he said. "I don't operate well in chaos." "And I do?" I asked. "No," he said quietly. "You endure it." That word hung in the air. "I don't want you to endure anymore," he continued. "I want you secure." "Secure under whose control?" I asked gently. He flinched. "I'm not trying to control you. You filed legal paperwork to override my autonomy." His voice rose slightly. "Because you were making major financial decisions while staying with a man from 40 years ago." "Daniel is not a risk factor," I said calmly. "He is a witness." "A witness to what?" "To the fact that I still have agency." Michael leaned back, frustrated. "You don't understand what this looks like." "I don't care what it looks like," I replied. "I care what it is." Silence settled again. "You've changed," he said finally. "Yes," I said. "I stopped prioritizing your comfort over my independence." That landed. He looked around the townhouse slowly. The modest furniture, the absence of luxury. "You're really selling the land," he said. "Yes." "And you're staying here?" "For now." "With him?" "Yes." Michael rubbed his face with both hands. "I thought I was protecting you."
You were protecting the version of me that fit your narrative. "And what narrative is that?" he asked. "That I'm aging into dependency instead of evolving into autonomy." He didn't argue this time. "I don't know how to relate to you like this," he admitted quietly. "That's honest," I said. He looked up at me, vulnerability breaking through for the first time. "I'm scared," he said. "Of what?" "That you won't need me anymore." The simplicity of it softened something in me. "I don't need you to manage me," I said gently. "I need you to respect me." He swallowed hard. "I don't know how to do that yet." "Then learn," I replied.
Daniel stepped back into the room then, not intruding, just present. Michael stood. "I don't trust him," he said bluntly. Daniel met his gaze evenly. "You don't have to, but you do have to trust her." Michael looked at me one last time. "This isn't over," he said. "No," I agreed. "It's just honest now." When he left, the house felt strangely lighter. Daniel poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to me. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. And I meant it. Not because the conflict was resolved, but because it was finally visible. I thought confrontation would bring closure. I didn't yet understand that the final decision wouldn't be about my son. It would be about whether I was ready to choose my future without apology.
The land sold 2 weeks later. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just legally and cleanly. I signed the final documents in Karen's office, the pen steady in my hand. When the transfer confirmation came through, I didn't feel grief. I felt release. 40 years of mortgage payments, birthday dinners, arguments, laughter, Thomas's voice echoing through the kitchen, reduced to a number on a page. And yet, not erased, just completed. That evening, Daniel and I sat on the small back porch of his townhouse. The air carried the early edge of autumn. Leaves shifted in the yard, restless but not frantic. "It's done," I said. He nodded. "How do you feel?" "Clear," I replied, "lighter than I expected." Daniel didn't press further. He never did. Michael hadn't called since the confrontation. I knew he was processing, recalibrating his role in a version of me he hadn't anticipated. 3 days after the sale closed, he texted, "Can we have dinner, just us?" I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant near his apartment, not the kind he used to take clients to, something smaller, more neutral. He looked tired when he arrived. "I read the closing documents," he said once we were seated. "I assumed you would," I replied. "I won't challenge it," he added. "I didn't expect you to." He studied me for a long moment. "I was wrong about one thing," he said finally. "Only one?" I asked softly. I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant near his apartment. Not the kind he used to take clients to, something smaller, more neutral. He looked tired when he arrived. "I read the closing documents," he said once we were seated. "I assumed you would," I replied. "I won't challenge it," he added. "I didn't expect you to." He studied me for a long moment. "I was wrong about one thing," he said finally. "Only one?" I asked softly. He almost smiled. "I thought you were being reckless," he continued, "but you weren't. You were decisive." I let that sit. "I still worry," he admitted. "You're allowed to," I said. "You're just not allowed to override me." He nodded slowly. "Is he permanent?" Michael asked carefully. "Daniel?" I said. "Yes." I considered that. "He's present," I replied. "Permanence isn't something we negotiate at our age. Presence is." Michael leaned back, absorbing that. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "You won't, unless you insist on managing me instead of knowing me." That conversation didn't fix everything, but it shifted something fundamental. When I returned to the townhouse that night, Daniel was in the kitchen reading. "Well?" he asked gently. "He's trying," I said. Daniel closed his book. "That's more than most people manage," he replied. Weeks passed. The money from the land sale sat safely invested, conservative, structured, entirely under my name. I found a small apartment not far from Daniel's house, not because I needed distance, but because I needed independence. Daniel helped me move in, carefully, respectfully. No assumptions about permanence, no merging of lives beyond intention. One evening, as we stood in my new living room surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, he said, "I don't want to be your shelter." You aren't, I replied. What am I? He asked. I smiled. You're someone I choose. That seemed to settle him. We did not move in together. We did not make grand promises. We built something steadier than that. We shared dinners, walks, conversations that stretched without urgency. Some nights he stayed, some nights he went home. I wasn't rebuilding the life I lost. I was designing the life I wanted. One afternoon, I visited the old property one last time before construction began under new ownership. The maple tree had finally been removed, the foundation leveled. I stood there quietly, wind brushing across the open space. Thank you, I whispered, not to the house, but to the version of myself who survived it. As I turned back toward the car, I realized something that had taken months to understand. The tornado didn't destroy my life. It exposed where I had been living out of habit instead of intention, and my son's resistance didn't break our relationship. It forced it into honesty. That night, sitting across from Daniel with a glass of wine between us, I said, I don't regret any of it. Even the storm? He asked. Especially the storm, I replied. He reached for my hand, not to steady me, just to meet me. And for the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't survival. It was authorship. I once believed security meant holding on tightly to what I had built. Now I understand it means knowing when to let go and having the courage to choose what comes next.